Welcome to the Hospitality Maverick podcast with me, Michael Tingsar. We at Hospitality Mavericks are here to inspire leaders to create heart-centered and profitable businesses from the inside out, the kind that both employees and customers love and support. Thanks to BizSimply for sponsoring this episode as our show partner. And BizSimply is the all-in-one HR, workforce management, road and operations software designed and built by hospitality experts to make every shift run like clockwork. And we join forces to help the industry to find new ways to become even more innovative in how we lead our people, how we operate, to how we grow our businesses, to how we serve our customers. Together we want to share strategies and tools that can make the industry thrive long term, not just survive.
Where the market currently is, for me, like these dark kitchens are the new street food, and they do really kind of enable entrepreneurs and new concepts to launch. And then if these concepts are really good and they take off, you're more likely to be in a position to accumulate a little bit of revenue that you can reinvest into a very small takeaway place. And then later on, when you have more money, you can reinvest into a proper maybe restaurant and so on. It's a process.
This is Tim Vasilakis, founder and CEO at The Athenian, which serves you the award-winning gyros across the UK, made the Athenian way. In this conversation, Tim shares the purpose behind The Athenian and how they went from a street food trader to bricks and mortar and now a dark kitchen operator. We dive into the current challenges of the industry and we touch on the staffing crisis, and he shares how they are reinventing their people practices to retain and attract talent. We talk about the future of the industry, and here he thinks that the next 12 months is going to be really challenging, especially because the unknown factor of Brexit. He shares some of his learnings during the last 18 months and what he does as a founder to survive and thrive in these uncertain times. Before you tune in, please sign up for a weekly newsletter packed with more Maverick insights, strategies and tools. Find a link in the show notes or visit hospitalitymavericks.com. This conversation starts with Tim sharing his stories of the Athenian. Enjoy. Today we will be talking about how you actually maybe go in and reconsider the whole setup of your business, even your positioning of your business during a pandemic, and how you actually do that with success, and how you actually take a product to market that, you know, most people love when they go on holiday, but actually make it into street food and actually create dark kitchens, and also how you actually bring that into the home of people, like really good Greek food. And for that, I have one of the experts in that, I will say, here in the UK. I have Tim from The Athenian joining us, the founder. Welcome to the show, Tim.
Hi, Michael. Thank you so much for having me.
For people out there that haven't heard about The Athenian, you're not just in London. Let's just clarify that. You are across the country in different regional cities, but I'll let you come back to that. But can you tell us a bit about your story and what your purpose is and how you ended up with running a restaurant business?
Yeah, sure. So I started The Athenian back in 2014, at the end of 2014, like November time. And it was really an experiment. It wasn't, I didn't really know where it would head. So I started with setting up a gazebo stall in Sunday Market in Haringey at the time, just literally trialing even like the positioning of the tables, to the menu having only 2 items, and just seeing how people would react to it. And even though that market was very quiet, it wasn't. There's a lot of market in London. There's a lot of markets in London that are very popular, and that was definitely not one of them. In order to get to one of the more popular ones, you need to have a running concept, and you need to have a reasonable social media presence. You need to have done a lot of the preliminary work. So in the beginning, usually you're more likely to get into one of the smaller markets, but that also means, less sales. But I didn't mind that. I thought, we're going to go to that market, give it a try and see how it goes, find our feet as well, because when you have customers for the first time, you want to make sure that every order is attended and so on. But we did reasonably well there. We had about 40 customers on the first day, which was a lot for that market. It was, from what I remember, I think it was like the maximum the market had, like one of the best stalls in the market had ever done. So I thought that was a good indicator if you're in a quiet market and pretty much almost all of the customers come and try the food. So that kind of was a little nice boost. And then shortly after that, I had an interview with Tower Hamlets Council, who manage Brick Lane Market, which is one of the, at least at the time in 2014, was one of the most popular in London. And I had an interview with them and they loved the concept. So I started going there on Sundays. So I moved from Haringey Market into Brick Lane Sunday Market. And from there, it was just on fire because consistently sold out Sunday after Sunday. I was not bringing enough food. And that really helped kind of like accelerate the growth. And then the once a week market became twice a week, Fridays and Sundays, and then Thursdays, Fridays, and Sundays. And then it became a 7-day operation very quickly. However, it was quite obvious that street food is a very difficult environment to operate in, purely because you don't have access to very basic necessities like electricity and running water. So you really rely on bringing your own gas and bringing your own water, which has a limit. It's also very kind of like exposed to the elements of the weather, especially in the winter months. So I knew it from the back of my mind that, I had an expiration date. There's only so long you can kind of like do this kind of project. And, for many people, I see some of the traders that I used to trade next to, they're still going. And for a lot of people, that's absolutely fine. It's just, when I saw the success of the Athenian from the early days, I thought, this has legs and we need to progress and eventually get into a place where we have electricity and running water without having to bring it with us, which might seem funny, but yeah, so fast forward, like those first 2 years, we did everything from Christmas markets to summer festivals, to you name it. And that really helped kind of like accelerate the growth of the business. Everything that we made, we reinvested. And then around 2016, we got our first shipping container in Elephant and Castle in a place called That Works. That place is not there anymore. It's been kind of like demolished. It was like one of those startup-y kind of places where you could have like food, offices, a mix of the two, and they would just put like temporary shipping containers. And then shortly after that, we had a unit in Boxpark Shoreditch, which we still maintain to this day. We're still in Boxpark Shoreditch, which again, for people that are familiar with these concepts in London, it's again like supposed to kind of like encourage businesses, independent small businesses to start up. And then the rest is history. We did a transition over a year and a half where we moved from street food into permanent locations. And then shortly before COVID, coincidentally, we decided to take a chance on our very first dark kitchen. And for people listening to us that might not be familiar with the term, over the US, it's called ghost kitchen. It depends, like in some other markets, it's called something else. Essentially, it's a delivery kitchen. It's a commercial kitchen where somebody rents and they use it to sell food online only on a platform like Deliveroo or Uber Eats. And when the customer sees the restaurant on the platform, it looks like a normal listing. It looks like a normal restaurant. The customer doesn't know that it's a delivery-only kitchen. So that's kind of like how I would describe how dark kitchens work. And coincidentally, just before, I think it must have been like a couple of months before COVID hit, we opened our first kitchen with Deliveroo in Battersea in London. And it was interesting. It was really interesting because in the end, we saw that actually the sales that were coming in were not so dissimilar to a normal kind of like traditional bricks and mortar. And for our cases, we're doing like fast casual food. So we're not like a sit down 3-course meal kind of experience restaurants. So always, bear that in mind. Our concept was always kind of like very well catered for delivery, kind of like the type of cuisine and food that we do. So when we saw kind of like the numbers coming in and the sales, we thought, actually, this has legs. This is not just an experimental project. And once the first lockdown was announced, it was basically a no-brainer. Deliveroo had a huge pipeline of kitchens for us that we could take over, and we of course said yes. And in a very short time, we opened quite a large number of delivery kitchens. And in a sort of post-pandemic world, that's kind of become a big chunk of how the business operates now. At this date, we have 13 sites open, and only 4 of them are bricks and mortar. The rest, the remaining 9 are all dark kitchens, and we have plans to open at least another 6 by mid 2020, and probably even more by the end of 2022. So yeah, that's kind of like a brief overview of where it started and where we are currently.
What was the, where was the idea, the purpose for, going to create the Athenian? What was that you were missing? It was often that the founder was missing something when they go out and build it, or can see an opportunity.
Definitely. So before I started it out, I was a customer of those kind of like street food markets. So I would very regularly, especially in the weekends or even like during the week, during lunch, I would go to these markets to get food. And I always found them fascinating how for a small amount of cash, you could try cuisines from all over the world that were just side by side to each other. And it was just a completely different experience to going to a restaurant. And there was always no representation of Greek cuisine, specifically the type of food that we do, gyros and souvlaki at the Athenian. And it kind of occurred to me that, like if gyros and souvlaki is number 1 in Greece, there's a reason. It's because people love it. It's because it combines a lot of things that people want to have when they eat out. And I thought, the fact that it doesn't yet exist in the UK, or at least didn't exist in 2014 when I started, the representation was very small at the time. It was very, very, very difficult to find souvlaki and gyros, and the chances were if you were to find it, it wasn't souvlaki or gyros. It was something vaguely similar. It wasn't really how I would have it if I was to go back home to Athens. And also at the time, Greece was in the news a lot with the crisis and a lot of negativity about the country and its capabilities to pull its economy together, and a lot of negative kind of like narrative about the Greek people. And that really kind of made me really stubborn to prove the opposite. And also I was just really just fed up and tired of going out to eat Greek food and being served the same stereotype, the same exaggeration, the same references to ancient Greece, the blue and the white, the Hercules font, the Opa, just all of the things that, they have been fading away from Greek culture for the past few decades. So it's not even like a new thing. And me as a person, like being born and brought up in Athens, specifically, like I was never really exposed to any of those stereotypes. And especially when you go out to eat in Greece, there is none of that exaggeration of, like the references to ancient Greece. Like it has nothing to do with going out and having a meal, having references to ancient history and temples and things like that. And I thought, why don't we just take all of that away and just make a place where it just happens to have Greek food, and it just kind of translates to everyone, whether you're from the US, the UK, from Thailand, from Japan, from Australia, from Dubai, and you just get it. You don't have to necessarily associate or have a narrative of those kind of like exaggerations of really outdated and inaccurate, I would argue, borderline racist stereotypes, actually. So yeah, and I thought, let's do something simple, minimal, and something that would be kind of like young and trendy at the same time and a little bit hip, something that, it wouldn't kind of like alienate people. So these are kind of like the main reasons.
Yeah. What about what do you would you say then? You say that when you started out, the offering of Athenian food or Greek food was not explosive in the way, and as you say, it's a bit different now. There's some more players in the market. But why are you different? What is it that the Athenian really do well?
I think it's the simplicity of our menu. From the beginning, we said we're gonna do gyros, and that's basically it. We have a couple of sides and a lot of variations of that dish. But at the end of the day, that's still, to this day, that's still what we do. We don't try to put moussaka on the menu or other Greek dishes that you would no way find in a souvlaki place if you visited Greece. In Greece there's like two different types of places. There's a taverna where they do kind of like um, it's basically like an overview of the whole cuisine that you can go and experience and have like more kind of home cooked dishes like moussaka or pasticcio, which is like a pasta dish, or like meat, or you can go to a fish taverna, which specializes in seafood. And then there's like souvlaki places that literally just do souvlaki. And maybe they will have a couple of other like salad dishes and side dishes, but they don't divert too much from the core product, which is a souvlaki. However, when you leave Greece and you go abroad, and not just in the UK, just pretty much everywhere, you would find souvlaki on the menu, and then you would see moussaka, and you would see pasticcio, and you would see other things that, I mean, fair enough if that's what people want to do. But in my view, if you really want to maintain quality and standards, the moment you start to introduce a million things on the menu, the likelihood of getting it right diminishes. So if you just keep the menu simple, then it just means that you do one thing and you do it well.
Yeah, I love that because I have a little note here, as you will see here, if you could see the screen for the listener, says do one thing well. And I'm a big advocate of that. And when I prepared for this conversation, looked at the menu, I'm already thinking about the Mediterranean diet, like the way your menu is to position it, because there's also quite a lot of I don't know if it's been thought about constantly, but indirectly in the Greek diet, there's a lot of great plant-based food as well. I know the meat is always connected to Greek food, but again, there's always more greens than there's meat. That's the opposite of the Western diet, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I have to say, like in continental Greece, where the climate tends to be, especially in the winter, heavier and colder, you see that the diet is very reliant on meat, especially in the countryside, and the small towns. However, if you visit the islands, and especially in the summer, there's a lot of vegetables and fish, seafood on the menu. And there's a big variety of like pulses, like lentils, beans, and then vegetables like aubergines, courgettes, and so on. So there are two kind of like cuisines in Greece, and I am, because since I left Greece when I was 18 years old, and I moved to the UK and I started to travel the world. Every time I would go back to Greece, it would be primarily to the islands and Athens, and I think that gives you maybe kind of a slightly different kind of like access to the cuisine. So I think, if you go to the countryside, you see that there is still like a lot of reliance on meat dishes. And I think it's probably related to the way that the climate is different in continental Greece versus to the islands. The islands always have a milder climate. And a lot of these islands don't have big animals to farm. They only have goats. So they rely a lot on like goat's cheese, olive oil, and things like that, and then growing their own vegetables. So I think it's all to do with like locally what can be sourced as well, like how the diet is. But the menu of the Athenian, we try to stay true to what a true authentic Athenian Greek gyros would be like. So pork and chicken, for instance. But then we take it a step further and we bring it to 2022, and we say, what do people want to eat in 2022 London? And we see a big trend with plant-based proteins and alternatives. And even though to this day, finding a vegan gyros in Greece is extremely rare, if at all possible. I've not seen it in my most recent visit in Athens, going to eat souvlaki out. It's not something that you would find on the menu. They do try to do like different alternatives with mushrooms and stuff like that, but you wouldn't see like an alternative to meat that would taste like meat. So it's still kind of like not really a thing in Greece, but that doesn't stop us from us trying to innovate and bring something new to the table and try to evolve Greek cuisine along the way, which I think is extremely important.
You talked a bit about in the beginning of the conversation about your roots coming from street foods, and there was a time where a lot that was the way to do it, because it was too expensive to start in bricks and mortar, and to start with street food, experiment, build up the awareness, build the brand, and so on. Do you still think if there's anyone sitting out there with like a food idea they want to go and try out, do you still think that's the one of the most viable ways in the current environment as well?
Things have changed a lot in a short time. So even though it's only been 7 years since the Athenian started, the marketplace is completely different. I almost feel like we've changed century in those 7 years. Like that's how radically things have changed. So what used to be a really nice way for someone to start up a food business, now I don't know if I would personally have the courage to go and do exactly what I did 7 years ago, because it's just a different world that we're living in, just in general. Like COVID has changed so many things that we've gotten used to over the past 2 years, and we probably don't even realize how much has changed because we've gotten used to the change. Um, so street food markets are not gonna disappear and go away, definitely not. And once the pandemic is behind us, people will be out um, consistently and throughout the year again to these street food markets. And of course, they will continue to be attractive for someone to start a concept. It's just I feel that in the last 2 years, it's been very, very difficult, especially in the beginning of the pandemic, like to maintain kind of all of that distance in a tiny stall. If there's like two or three people working, it's impossible. You're just next to each other, and people just staying at home and not going out as much, ordering online. All of these things that would have had an impact. And I think it must have been very difficult for street food traders in the last couple of years to make a living. And and develop their concepts further. I think it must have been incredibly difficult and frustrating. That's why I think when we see the rise of dark kitchens, for me this is the new street food, kind of like the new age of street food. I put street food in inverted commas here because it's not really street food, but I see a lot of parallels between when I started doing the street food and now these dark kitchens, in the sense that it's very low risk, it's very low cost, so you don't have to invest an absolute fortune. Like if you open a restaurant, you literally need to be rich. Like you need to be very rich to have made a lot of money in your life and to just have it sitting in the bank, or get a massive bank loan, which a bank is not likely to give just like that without guarantees or anything like that. So it just makes it less likely for someone with a really good idea that just doesn't have that capital, which is the vast majority of the population nowadays is in that situation. So it's basically impossible to start a restaurant if you're just a startup company. You would no way have the capital to do it. It's just that expensive. But with dark kitchens, the cost is basically the cost of your equipment. And if you are exclusive with a platform like Deliveroo, they pay for that. So they pay for all of your equipment. So that reduces the cost even further. But obviously, to be exclusive with Deliveroo, you need to be an existing brand, to have a running history, and to be attractive to them, to want you to be exclusive with them. They won't just offer exclusivity to anyone that just starts, a brand right now. You need to really establish yourself and prove that you have a really good concept that people want to buy on the platform. So I think, where the market currently is, for me, like these dark kitchens are the new street food, and they do really kind of enable entrepreneurs and new concepts to launch. And then if these concepts are really good and they take off, you're more likely to be in a position to accumulate a little bit of revenue that you can reinvest into a very small takeaway place. And then later on, when you have more money, you can reinvest into a proper maybe restaurant and so on. It's a process.
Yeah, it is interesting. What you're saying is about the experiment and actually knowing what works and doesn't work. You started talking about that in the beginning of the communication. What does people like about your menu, your brand, and how do you bring it all together? Because that's a journey, and I know you've been on that with the Athenian. How has all that come together with the pandemic as well? Because you changed a lot within your business over the pandemic, like anyone else. But like it's one thing was you said like the dark kitchen really took off, and it seems like that's the model going forward. Does that mean your growth plans, you're not looking at bricks and mortar? Is that not a way of approaching growth for the Athenian, or are you still open for that?
So again, it's like, I'll give you an example. So towards like summer last year, end of summer last year to like beginning of winter, and to the run up to Christmas, we were actually reviewing a couple of bricks and mortar locations, and we have put an active offer in one. However, like after the Omicron variant, and the order like for people to work from home, and just seeing that kind of like over the counter revenue disappear overnight in the 4 bricks and mortar locations that we have, it does make me very, very nervous. Whereas, the dark kitchens that we have, the revenue is just really stable throughout the year. It doesn't have, it's just not really affected by these external conditions like a new variant changing people's behavior, because it just seems like that the online demand, one way or another, levels itself out. If people are going more out, although there's been a lot of articles recently saying that post kind of like lockdown habits persist, and like people ordering online, like the fact that we have been out of lockdown for a while, like it seems, at least in the short to medium term, it seems that those habits haven't changed as dramatically as people expected. That's again to lead on from the point I was making earlier, that we don't even realize how much we've changed in this 2-year process of the pandemic, and how much our habits have changed in that process. So I will be cautious, like we will be cautious as a business in the next 12 months and just monitor, because guaranteed, like spring, summer will be amazing. Everyone will be out and about. But I think, again, is there going to be more uncertainty when, it gets cold and we're all more stuck indoors, and, that again makes it more likely for spread of another variant or whatever it might be to come out and then get another booster shot? I don't know. And nobody has a crystal ball. So I think the sensible thing to do for now is just to be a little bit cautious, and just wait to see how the market is going to change. At the end of the day, it's the market that's going to dictate our business decisions.
Yeah, yeah. So you are cautious about growth, but you still see opportunities. I can hear you say. What about, there's like one factor I can see that even people I talk with that had the opportunity to expand couldn't, because of this staffing crisis that's going on, and it's not going to go away any day soon. It feels like a bit chronic in a way in the moment, and everything changes, and that's how it is in life. But how has this impacted you guys, and how are you trying to overcome it?
So we have been affected by it, not as much as some of the stories that I hear out there, because we have been extremely kind of like proactive about not being in a situation where we just don't have staff and we just don't open. But it's definitely very, very noticeable across all levels, from like entry level jobs up to like really senior jobs. There's just a general shortage of candidates, and as a result, candidates are much more picky in a situation like that, and they're very selective about where they will go next. And it makes sense. Why should people work for a company that doesn't offer good benefits and maybe doesn't have a good reputation overall? So I think having a really strong brand and a really good work ethic is key, and just a good reputation overall is extremely important. But I think as an industry, we're just going to suffer for now, until the government acknowledges the fact that the hospitality industry is really heavily affected by the labor shortages, and they change the rules for allowing to bring people from other countries to do these, to work in this industry. And as it currently sits, with the visas being at £30,000 minimum to bring someone in, and even though there are jobs at that rate in hospitality, not all jobs are at that rate. And if all jobs were at that rate, it would basically make the UK, it would turn the UK into Switzerland overnight in terms of like how much people pay for food. And even though Switzerland is a very successful, financial model as a country, it's also tiny, and I don't know whether that would be easy to replicate in a 70 million population with huge inequalities kind of financial system. So it's a little bit difficult at the moment. I'm hoping that eventually the government will acknowledge the issue and they will bring down the threshold of the £30,000 to acknowledge, to say, actually, what is the average salary on hospitality? Or, if this is a way to bring salaries up naturally through the market, that's fine, because I do understand that hospitality has the reputation of not being the most well-paid industry, but it's also in correlation to what people are willing to pay when they go out to eat. And when prices are going up left, right, and center, like supermarkets, electricity, bills, everything's going up, that just reduces the budget that people have available when they go out to eat, because it's not like a basic necessity, eating out. People will eventually just have less to spend, and that will affect everyone. And I think that could have like a knock-on effect. So the current situation, I'm diverting a little bit from maybe the original question, but it just leads me to the point that the current kind of like situation is definitely not sustainable. And I wouldn't be surprised in the next 12 months if we see a lot of businesses just closing down and not being able to cope. A lot of businesses have already increased prices. We've been trying to resist that, but there's only so much, there's only so long that we can resist it for, when everybody around us, all of our suppliers have increased the prices, everything has gone up. So that eventually will have to be passed on to the customer, unfortunately. So it will just be an interesting year, I think, the next year. Also, kind of wanted to add in there that the UK is generally going through a very big transition now. And it might not be so obvious because a lot of that transition is being masked behind COVID. And a lot of the conversations that would have been had otherwise, the debate has, COVID has completely taken over the debate now. And I think it's blurred kind of like the horizon, and people are not seeing very clearly of where this transition is kind of heading. And it's just the way it is, unfortunately. Everyone will have to adapt to that transition. But it will be interesting to see what comes after it, like what the country turns into in the coming years, because there is a clear transition since 2016, since the referendum vote to leave the EU. And it will be interesting to see how the country adapts into this new chapter.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there, Tim, because we really don't know. And as you said, it's been blurred a bit behind the whole COVID situation because, it's two big things in itself, a transition from a membership that has so many connection to trade deals, the cost of energy and so on. So it's going to be really interesting to see where that lands, because, of course, hospitality is going to stand first in a potential if it goes the wrong way as well, because that's people's dispensable income they spend there. If we go back to talk about the staffing crisis, just want to shortly touch on that again. So is there any specific thing you can say you are doing right now and you're working on to be that attractive employer you're talking about?
So we've just launched an employee loyalty scheme, like a 5-year plan with the aim to build up loyalty in our industry. We know that our industry has one of the highest rates of turnover of staff. So we launched a comprehensive kind of 5-year package. So the longer somebody stays with us, the higher the reward, and the highest and the top of that reward is kind of gradually increasing the benefits and holiday, with the 5th year being a full paid sabbatical, 4-week paid sabbatical, which is very unusual in that kind of industry. And that's on top of your holiday allowance. So essentially, it's basically two months paid leave. So that's one of the things that we're trying to do. We recently started to work closely with a recruitment agency to help us with our recruitment needs, where they go and headhunt people that might not be available otherwise. Unfortunately, the downside of that is recruitment hiring costs, because an agency will take a percentage of the person's salary. But given where things are at the moment, it's maybe necessary, I would argue, in certain positions. And in certain areas that we trade, it's just almost impossible to find staff, like in some parts of the UK. And there is like, like the point that I made earlier about us being proactive and not just waiting around to see what happens, like having the agency to help us headhunt people. And then constantly reviewing the package that we're offering and comparing it to competitors to make sure that we're a step ahead of everyone else, so that if someone was considering a job in this industry, we would be one of their first choices out there. But it's a work in progress, and it's constantly, you have to monitor it constantly because these things change like every 6 months. So it's a tough one.
What about, you already touched a bit about where you see the industry, but where do you think we are? If you had a crystal ball, Tim, where do you think the industry is in 18 months' time? What is, how would you describe what's going on?
I think, the analogy that I made to Switzerland earlier is probably not likely to happen with the UK. I think what's more likely to happen is this kind of like not so sustainable just explosion of costs for all of the businesses, not just hospitality, but it's just hospitality has such high overheads that is just disproportionately affected. But that, if you compare it to like a technology company that doesn't have a physical product and therefore the only overheads are office costs and staff, hospitality is not like that. You have to pay rent, you have to pay staff, you have to pay holidays, you have to pay so many things, packaging, the food itself, the raw material, the supplies, and so on. And if you're working with these platforms, like online delivery, they get a really high commission. So let's not forget that. That's also an added cost. So I think what is probably likely to happen is, like I was saying before, not everyone is going to be able to get through this period. And eventually some businesses will have to close. And I think that will, in inverted commas, correct the market, even though I don't like to use that term, because businesses closing down is not correcting the market. It's people going out of work and people becoming, poor and not having any stability, which is really bad overall for the economy. But that is maybe what's likely to happen over the next 18 months, and especially after 2 years of COVID. And, like the UK government has been very generous in its furlough scheme in comparison to other governments in Europe. But that came to an end and they reintroduced it. It will eventually just come to a permanent end, that kind of like government supports. And, the government will want its money back eventually. Like VAT is scheduled to go back up to 21%. We don't know what other taxes might be introduced because 2 years of free money for everyone is good because it didn't, let the whole economy collapse. But eventually the government will want to get the money back, and they will probably have to find some pretty tough ways to get that money back. And that will leave very, very tight space for businesses to make a profit, especially in hospitality, where the space is already very tight as things are at the moment.
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, you're right, because there's no free money. There's no free lunch, as they say as well in life. To move a bit on from the Athenian and the industry, I also wanted to hear a bit more about you, because you've been on a journey as an entrepreneur, starting back in 2014 to now 7 years later. On that journey, is there like some people, or maybe even before that, has been very significant to you? That's really had an impact on you, the way you think, the way you are, and really pushed you in the right direction?
Yeah, definitely. I think my mom's cooking is definitely one of them. Just like the way that my mom cooks, that's definitely has had an impact on me and my cooking and the things that I like to eat and so on. And I think also my partner in life, who I've been with for like a decade now, he was the one that really helped the Athenian kind of like set off, in the sense that he was there on that Sunday, in the first Sunday in the market, to help with the van, to put out the tables and the gazebo, stay in the freezing cold, even though he had a full-time job Monday to Friday, really demanding and stressful. And I really do think sometimes if it wasn't for him, maybe the Athenian would never have had existed. So I really owe him a lot. And like even in the early years, like the first 3 years, even though he wasn't coming to the market after a few months on Sundays anymore, he always like had an influence and ideas on social media on how to make the business better, on design. He has a really good eye for design, so I always go to him when like anything related to design, branding, interior, like anything, to see if he likes it is usually a good sign that we made a good choice. So it's kind of like this background figure that nobody sees at the Athenian, but has actually had a huge influence.
Yeah, that's really interesting. There, you touch on people that's maybe not even within the industry, but actually people that actually are they're there in bad or good as it is in business. It's not always easy. What about during the last 18 months? I've talked with a lot of people has like you really reflected and had some learnings. What have you? And we all had some learnings, and maybe some of us have adapted new habits, some of us maybe have done nothing, but have you had any like significant learning and change in the way you do things or look at things the last 18 months or 2 years is it almost now?
I think, what a lot of people have said in the last 2 years, just don't take anything for granted. Things we used to take for granted now are like a rarity almost, or they have been for long periods of time. And then be always on your toes and ready to adapt, because it's clear that we live during times with a very high pace of change, and it's kind of like sink or swim. Unfortunately, it's really quite brutal and harsh how the world is changing at such a fast pace. But I really feel like, with business especially, you really have to be on your toes and monitor the market and like listen to the market and just adapt as soon as you can see the change. Do it, if possible, even before the change actually happens, if you can see it coming.
And that's quite interesting what you're saying there, because it's almost like what you have to become better at. I've heard others say that you almost have to be better at predicting what's coming ahead with the signals you see. So your job as the founder is really to be in that vision, that ahead of the business all the time and looking at both the market, but also what the business needs to follow that.
Yeah, I think you have, as an entrepreneur and a founder of a business, you really have to develop the ability to read the market. And anyone failing to do so, they will realize that they will be in trouble very, very quickly. And it's not easy to read the market. The market is a complex place, it's very diverse, and it's very heavily influenced by external factors that nobody has control over. However, I do agree that there's always signs, early warning signs, and if you really carefully pay attention to those signs, you are in a better position to prepare for what might be coming later on. And just to kind of like lift spirits up a bit, I think change is a good thing. I think if we just stay the same and just never change, like things just become really um, just like water that doesn't renew itself. It eventually just stops breathing, kind of. Like it's really vital. We have to be changing, as part of everyone just becoming better in whatever they do, and developing and evolving.
Yeah, and I think that's also, I loved you said that, they don't take anything for granted. Um, like, don't take for granted you can just go and see your family. That's one of the things I've learned as well, because my family, most of it is back in Denmark, and even that is only 1.5 hour away from here, 1 hour and 45. It's not been, I've seen them a bit more in 2021 than I did in the 2 years before that, almost like, and it's just you don't take those things for granted. Do it while you can as well. That's one of the things I've learned. So I really love that as well. I don't know if you give a book away to people. I love to ask this question because it says a lot sometimes. That I don't know if you have like a favorite book you give to people, or you have something else you give them for that sake, and why that.
Yeah, I think if we're on the topic of books, I think I would definitely give Trevor Noah's Born a Crime, which is stories from his childhood, born in South Africa and being the child of of a white father and a black mother, and how that during apartheid that was illegal, and it was just not allowed. You were not allowed to have a child be like a mixed race child, and how that impacted his childhood. And he's a comedian, so he presents everything through the spectrum of comedy and making everything comical. But it's a really interesting story, and I think it's really kind of like empowering, like for anyone that will read it to even think that something like that would even be possible. But that's actually in recent human history. It's not even like that long ago. uh, Trevor Noah is still very young. He's not um, like too mature for his for sorry, I just completely lost it. I'm just very careful with choosing my words, so maybe you can cut that out. Yeah, so I think that's definitely a book that I would recommend.
Yeah, and it's an interesting book because it's a bit of a different angle on a book recommendation. It's more a book about life and also challenges, like huge challenges that you're maybe not always in control in an environment you're in. I love that. Um, uh, you run a business, and you said the last 2 years, you almost said we almost got used to it at some point. And we all know how tough it is and hard it is. But how do you, as the founder, show up pro every day? Because you need to bring the energy. People look up at you, even if it's the customers or the employees or any other stakeholders will look at you. And it's so important to show up in the right way. How do you do it?
It's a good question. I think when you're, like I was saying before, it really is sink or swim. So I guess you just keep on swimming. You don't really have a choice. Especially like you have to be, if you are the founder of a business, you really have to be the one that keeps a straight face and pulls everyone through, even in the grimmest of times. And again, it's like you just don't have a choice. You have to, like, there is no other way of doing it. I think when you're left with no choice, you just do what you got to do. There's no other way.
And it's really interesting you say that, like, the conditions almost frame you what you need to do. And I guess it's also that, your vision is bigger than the pandemic. The pandemic shouldn't be determining your vision in a way, and you hang on to that and you keep on pulling people through. I love that kind of view on it as well.
Definitely. And I think that if there's like something positive to take away from the pandemic, I think, like life at the end of the day will throw anything at you. And you just have to be prepared. Like this time, it was a collective trauma that we all experienced, and it was a pandemic. But life has always been that way. Life, you can wake up one morning and think that everything is in order and everything is amazing, and then before you know it, something has happened, and like your whole life is completely derailed. And you have to be prepared, and you have to develop the ability to be able to deal with all of these kind of like surprises in the best way that you can, and have the mental capacity to do so, which is very difficult. But ultimately, you will be the one that benefits from it if you have developed that ability.
Just a quick tail on question. So how do you actually work on your mental capability? Because that's a really interesting, because I totally agree with you. It's about how you create that extra space, that extra, room when things happen.
Yeah, I think for me, because I'm a very kind of like fiery person, and I definitely don't like nasty surprises in life. But I am trying to get better at it, at kind of like navigating through that, and sort of like self improve. I think developing the ability to be self aware is the first step to self improvement. Knowing what you're really good at, but also what you might not be so good, is extremely important, because acknowledging it is the first step to trying to fix it. And recently I'm looking more into kind of like mindfulness and meditation, and trying to like do it like guided, because doing it on your own in the beginning is extremely difficult. So only like getting started on that, and just using things that are free out there. There's a lot of things on Spotify, there's a lot of things on YouTube. If you really want to self-improve, you don't necessarily have to like invest any money, just some of your quality time into things that could enable you. And we're lucky in that way, because we live in a time that we just have so much information availability, which is a double-edged sword, because it really comes down to what we choose to do with it. We can spend 10 hours in front of a screen consuming our time on things that will not make us better, or we can spend an hour a day on things that maybe will have a little impact on us and try to make us better. So that's definitely something I would recommend to our listeners today, to kind of like explore that avenue of meditation, mindfulness, and just giving themselves quality time. I think time is, I would even call it like a commodity, in that sense that time is extremely precious. And we don't realize when you spend maybe 3-4 hours on Netflix or on YouTube watching things that, of course, we have to like unwind and relax. And you can't just be meditating 5 hours a day. That wouldn't work. But unless maybe you were a monk and you were doing it for a specific reason during a certain period of your life. But I really think that we really need to be a little bit more conscious about where we put our time. We always, no matter how busy we are, we do have time in our hands that we could invest to make it quality time. And this is something that I'm slowly starting to learn, the difference between quality time and anything else that's not quality time.
I love that. And it's also where, when you have that time where you put your energy. I really love that reflection, because I think, most business owners have those, challenges with time. And actually, but as you say, you need to make a choice. You need to there's moments where you can, if it's just 15 minutes every day, it will be 15 minutes every day over a year, will be very impactful and compounded in itself. Then I will give you like the last opportunity to give like your top 3 advice to leaders out there. What would your advice be, Tim?
I think is to think outside of the box and really use their imagination when it comes to like coming up with a concept. And I know that you do hear that a lot, like, oh, think outside the box. What does it actually mean? All it means is just don't do what everybody else does. If there's a lot of people doing something, it means it's a saturated product or market. So try to do something that hasn't been done, and always start from a niche that you can then maybe later on, if it matures, to make it more mainstream. Starting with a niche is always a good way to start, because you will get much more visibility if you start from a smaller demographic of people that might be interested in one thing that you're planning to do. Be adaptable. I think anyone who's resisting change is a recipe for disaster and is not gonna be able to pull through the changes that are heading our way.
I loved what you said about, doing niche things. And I had somebody give me advice about, Michael, you need to do things that doesn't scale first to really find out how they work. And then you find a way to scale it if it's really, a good niche and something that people want. So I really, really like that advice, because I think that's a good way of starting many, many things. If it's a business or it's an initiative within inside an organization, you almost need to think about the perfect model and then find out how you scale it afterward, instead of thinking about how do I scale it in the first kind of point of view. There's always a way to commercialize things if people really want them. So where can people find you, Tim, online? Is there any place they can go and connect with you if they want to ask you more, or if they want to check out The Athenian?
Yes, so we're on Instagram. We're at The Athenian UK, and then at The Athenian UK PB for plant-based. We have a plant-based account as well for our plant-based Athenian brand. And me personally, I don't have social media many years now, but I do have LinkedIn. So it's just Tim Vasilakis on LinkedIn for anyone that may be interested in connecting that way. And then we have our website, theathenian.co.uk, TikTok, The Athenian UK, and so on.
Great, Tim. Thank you so much for coming to the show and sharing your experiences, how you see things, and also how you are managing yourself and getting yourself in a better place as a leader and a founder of a business.
Thank you. It's been great talking to you. Thank you for your time today, and I hope your listeners enjoyed our chat.
Thank you so much, Tim, for sharing your journey and how you and the team are navigating the storms right now. I will recommend you to ask yourself, what can I do to improve our retention and attraction of talents going forward? To get further inspiration on how to improve your business Also tune in to episode number 126 with Simon Mitchell, CEO of Curb Food, on nurturing the future food businesses. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please share, rate, review, or subscribe to one of our channels. A big thank you to BizSimply for supporting us, bringing great insights, strategies, and tools to help the industry thrive, not just survive. Check them out at bizsimply.com or on their social at bizsimply or bizsimplyhq. You can also email them directly on advice@bizsimply.com. A big thank you to Fina Charlton, who's the show producer and editor from the Podcast Collective. Tune in next time for another interview, and in the meantime, find out more about us and subscribe to the newsletter and download free leadership tools at hospitalitymavericks.com. And don't worry if you didn't get all of this, there will be links in the show notes. I'm Michael Tingsager, and you've been listening to the Hospitality Mavericks podcast show. Be Maverick.